A century of life, a century of living.
But you're talking about Brooklyn Square. As I remember it, the first I remember of Jamestown was most of the business was down around Brooklyn Square. Mm-hmm. And then the railroad came across there. Mm-hmm. And then the business started to climb up the hill. The business went up the hill to about 2nd Street, and boy, you were really uptown then. And then it went up as far as 3rd, but it still wasn't when I was younger.
And then just beyond that, on the right-hand side, this is on Institute Street, was a blacksmith who had his shop there. And we could smell the horses' hoofs, as he'd put their shoes on. And we would stop and watch him very often, going to school, because I went to several years to St. James, mm-hmm. and we would stop and watch the blacksmith. And that was fun. On the corner of Market and Brooklyn Square, extension of Brooklyn Square, there was, which was really a piece of Forest Avenue there, mm-hmm. was this city market. And there was the place where people got their meats and the butter and eggs and every darn thing you'd want. You could even get rabbits at one time there. And the meats usually were on the outside booths, and they were all vying with each other for the customers. And people went to the same ones usually as they did, from week to week. Some of them would try somebody else once in a while, but most of them had their regular customers. They came there regularly, and they had nice fresh meats. They were good butchers, and then in the middle, you see, the stalls were for the big hunks of cheese, great big pieces of cheese, and butter with about 2 feet high. Wheels of butter, which they cut on. It smelled so good. It doesn't smell like that today. And it isn't because I'm older. It's really that I don't remember, but once in a great while, I'll hit a flavor. But it isn't the same.
One of the things I like about the shops at that time, when you see the pictures of Jamestown, downtown Jamestown at that time, were the awnings, the cloth awnings that all of the shops had out over the front of their stores. That I would love to see us go back to having those kinds of awnings to protect things from the sun.
Were there a lot of different businesses represented on Main Street? Was it?
Oh yes, I know. There's nothing that's in existence any longer, but there were, furniture, clothing of all kinds, just every kind of store imaginable, just as there is today. Banks, music stores, haberdasheries. We don't have haberdasheries particularly. Nobody wears hats. It was an era of hats, both men's and women's hats, and so you would have stores that were solely hat stores, which are no longer in business because it's not stylish to wear hats.
Actually, they had a lot of stores. They had a lot of men's stores for clothing because the men would buy ready-made things. The women still preferred buying their material, having a dressmaker come to the house with some patterns and making a dress just for them. They didn't really want any of the ready-made things. They had a lot of produce markets, meat markets. The banks were downtown. There were lawyers in the offices above the buildings. And if you notice, a lot of the buildings that are down, and I'm thinking just along Main Street now, have been there since the city began or shortly thereafter, and you can tell that by looking at the dates at the top of them. We tend to think of our business district as 3rd Street, 4th Street, and yet actually around the time the city started, it was more 1st Street, 2nd Street, going on up to 3rd. And when you got up to 4th, you started getting into the residential areas, and maybe where some of the churches were. So it just shifted a little bit, went a little bit higher as the years have gone on.
There, in old maps, I see a swamp downtown. Can you tell us where that was or where it is now?
It would cover just about the whole business district if you really want to know the truth. It was very, very swampy. In fact, I remember reading a story about how whenever a cow was lost, they just assumed it got lost in the swamp and they wouldn't even go out looking for it. It was so bad. So, sometimes you wonder how much Jamestown is built on if you know that there's a swamp under all those buildings and all those streets up there.
All 3rd Street, 2nd Street?
All 3rd Street, 2nd Street, over between, I want to say, Washington and, Maine. That whole area was a swamp.